Helen Keller learns to speak. Helen Keller. Helen Keller was born in 1880 in America. When she was a little more than a year old, an illness left her both blind and deaf. In spite of this, she not only learned to read and speak, but also had a college education. This selection from her book, The Story of My Life, will give us an idea of how she overcame some of her difficulties. I cannot remember what happened during the first months after my illness. I only know that I sat in my mother's lap or clung to her dress as she went about her household duties. My hands felt every object and noted every movement. In this way, I learned many things. Soon, I needed to have some kind of language and began to make crude signs. A shake of the head meant no, and a nod, yes. A pull meant come, and a push, go. Was it bread that I wanted? Then I would imitate the way we cut slices of bread and butter them. My mother was able to make me understand a good deal. I always knew when she wished me to bring her something, and I would run upstairs or anywhere else she asked me to go. Indeed, I owe to her wise ways all that was good in my difficult life. I understood a good deal of what was going on around me. At 5, I learned to fold and put away the clean clothes when they were brought in from the laundry. I knew by the way my mother and aunt dressed when they were going out, and I always begged to go with them. They always sent for me when there was company, and when the guests said goodbye, I waved my hand to them. I do not remember when I first knew that I was different from other people, but I knew it before my teacher came to me. I had noticed that my mother and my friends did not use signs as I did when they wanted anything done, but talked with their mouths. Sometimes I stood between two persons who were talking and touched their lips, but this did not work. This made me so angry at times that I kicked and screamed until I was tired. The most important day I remember in all my life is the one on which my teacher, Anne Sullivan, came to me. It was the 3rd of March, 1887, 3 months before I was 7 years old. From the beginning of my education, Miss Sullivan spoke to me as she would speak to any hearing child. The only difference was that she wrote the words on my hand instead of speaking them. If I did not know the words to speak my thoughts, she gave them to me. This went on for several years. The next important step in my education was learning to read. As soon as I could spell a few words, my teacher gave me slips of cardboard. On those were printed words in raised letters. I quickly learnt what each printed word stood for. I had a frame in which I could arrange the words in little sentences. But before I even put sentences into the frame, I used to make them with objects. I found the slips of paper which said, for example, doll, bed, and placed each name on its object. Then I put my doll on the bed with the words is, on, and bed arranged beside the doll. I thus made a sentence of the words. One day, Miss Sullivan tells me, I pinned the word girl on my pinafore and stood in the wardrobe. On the shelf, I arranged the words is, in, wardrobe. I was delighted with this game. My teacher and I played it for hours at a time. From the printed slip, it was but a step to the printed book. I took my Reader for Beginners in raised type, Braille, and hunted for the words I knew. When I found them, My joy was like that in a game of hide and seek. Thus I began to read. It was in the spring of 1890 that I learned to speak. The wish to utter sounds had always been strong within me. I used to make noises. I used to place one hand on my throat while the other hand felt the movements of my lips. I was pleased with anything that made a noise and liked to feel the cat purr and the dog bark. I also liked to keep my hand on a singer's throat or on a piano when it was being played. Before I lost my sight and hearing, I was fast learning to talk, but after my illness, I could not speak because I could not hear. I used to sit on my mother's lap all day long and keep my hands on her face. It made me happy to feel the movements of her lips. I moved my lips too, although I had forgotten what talking was. My friends say that I laughed and cried like everyone else, and for a while I made many sounds. There was, however, one word, the meaning of which I still remembered: water. I pronounced it wawa. Even this became less and less clear until Miss Sullivan began to teach me. I stopped using it only after I had learned to spell the word on my fingers. In 1890, Mrs. Lamson, a teacher of the deaf who had just returned from a visit to Norway and Sweden, came to see me. She told me of Runhild Kata, a deaf and blind girl in Norway. They had taught her to speak. I knew then that I too would learn to speak. I would not rest until my teacher took me for advice and help to Miss Sarah Fuller, the principal of the Horace Mann School for Deaf Children in Boston. This lovely, sweet-natured lady offered to teach me herself. We began on the 26th of March, 1890. Miss Fuller's method was this. She passed my hand lightly over her face and let me feel the position of her tongue and lips when she made a sound. I wanted to imitate every movement and in an hour had learnt 6 sounds of speech. M, P, A, S, T, I. Miss Fuller gave me 11 lessons in all. I shall never forget the surprise and delight I felt when I uttered my first whole sentence. It is warm. True, they were broken and stammering sounds, but they were human speech.